Having served you all now as pastor for the last 8 months, you have more than likely picked on something I often do in preaching sermons. That is, bring text into a larger contextual narrative. Today, in Matthew's account of the Transfiguration, we hear a bold proclamation and affirmation of who Jesus is as he stands next to Moses, kind of the embodiment of the law, and next to Elijah, kind of as an embodiment of the prophets. While the voice declares, "This is my Son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." This story is important for helping us to truly see who Jesus is for us, to help establish an even stronger affirmation of the claim in the Transfiguration. I will lift up a quick summary of the events in Matthew 16, the preceding chapter. So then, how do these verses shed light on the Transfigured narrative? Well, firstly, some of the disciples, and it tells us in chapter 16, tell Jesus that people are saying that he is John the Baptist, or Elijah, or Jeremiah. But Peter declares Jesus to be the Messiah. And then Jesus tells Peter that he will be the rock of the church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against him. And secondly, Jesus tells the disciples that he is going to be heading to Jerusalem, where he will undergo suffering, where he will die, but then he will rise on the third day. And thirdly, just as soon as Peter gets something right, Peter gets something wrong, because he tells Jesus that he can't die. And then that famous line from Jesus appears, "Get behind me, Satan." And finally, Jesus shares with the disciples how they must give up their own selves and follow him. So then enter 6 days later, Jesus takes Peter and James and John up a high mountain. Of course, anyone familiar with Old Testament stories of marvelous prophecy can see how heading up a mountain will lead to some great epiphany between the prophet and God. Moses, when receiving the law from God, goes up Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, enveloped in a cloud, until he comes back down the mountains with stone tablets erected by God's very hand. Tablets that lay out how God's people are to be in relationship with God and with one another. And Elijah goes up to Mount Horeb to hide in a cave after people are seeking to kill him. And then a rush of wind breaks rocks on the mountain, and that is followed by an earthquake and then a fire. But God was not in that wind, was not in that earthquake, was not in that fire. In the silence following the fire, God spoke to Elijah, declaring to Elijah what he will do when he has to come back down the mountain. And as quickly then as Jesus turned into a dazzling white before Peter, James, and John entered Moses and Elijah. Right? Two of the foremost prophets of the Old Testament. Jesus and Moses and Elijah are engaged in some conversation, one of which that we have no account of. But given their presence, we can infer that Moses and Elijah signify the transfer to a new covenant that God is making with humanity. And in this new covenant, Jesus, in chapter 16, has already foretold some of the stuff that is to take place. So Peter, ever eager to speak first, asked Jesus if he should make 3 dwellings, 3 tents, 3 tabernacles is a much older word. One for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And see, I don't think we can really fault Peter here. I mean, look at our society. When someone dies from a car crash, how often do you see a cross and some flowers at the spot of that accident? Or when traveling through the country, how often do you see a sign marking a place of historical significance? Truthfully, our very own town is a perfect example of this. And for those of you who have traveled to Europe or the Holy Land, how many places now have churches built on top of a significant religious spot? The Old Testament is even filled with stories where some prophet erected an altar after an encounter with the divine. It seems that human beings are always trying to hold on to places that are historical or sacred. And the practice of building upon important places is often a good thing. Right? It allows people to experience that place. But it can denigrate into a bad thing when that place itself becomes an idol. When it becomes more important to go to the place than to worship God because of what the place signifies. So Peter, before he could even finish speaking, a bright cloud gathered over them. And from the cloud a voice declared, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Brightness on top of brightness. First, Jesus in dazzling white, and now this brightness of a cloud. But when the disciples heard this voice, they fell to the ground in fear. And this, I think, is truly fascinating. When Jesus transfigured in front of them, they were not afraid. When Jesus was speaking with Moses and Elijah, they were not afraid. I mean, Peter even was so bold as to speak to Jesus while he was in this conversation with those 2 long-dead prophets of the Old Testament. But when the cloud overshadows them, they become terrified. Why? I'd like to suggest that in one way, maybe the overshadowing of the cloud is symbolic of idols in our lives. In this most amazing moment, witnessed by Peter and James and John, a miraculous event takes place. And just as soon as it happens, Peter is asking about a way to hold on to the event for just a little bit longer, instead of taking in the awe-inspiring epiphany in front of him. Peter is looking to hold on to that which cannot be held. And then, as the 3 disciples are cowered in terror, the great hope of this text comes in. Jesus reaches out to them and he touches them. They do not reach up to Jesus or use some words to bid Jesus to come to them, like, "Master, help us, for we are in a state of fear." Jesus does what Jesus promises to always do. Jesus comes to us. Jesus stoops down to them and says, "Get up and do not be afraid." Get up and do not be afraid. And when they rose, all that was left was Jesus. In an almost direct parallel to what is to come after Jesus has been put through suffering and death. After Jesus has died on the cross, he is laid in a tomb. And when Mary Magdalene and the other Mary arrived at the tomb, an earthquake occurred, and an angel descended from heaven. And the angel was like a bright light, and his clothes were white. And the guards were terrified, and they fell to the ground and died. But then the angel says to them, "Do not be afraid." And after seeing the tomb empty, in fear and joy, they ran to tell the disciples. And on the way, Jesus appears to them, and they fell and worshipped at his feet. But Jesus said, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell the others." In the power of the Holy Spirit, to work faith in our hearts, to believe what God has done through Jesus Christ. That's what we do. We come back down the mountain, and we come away from the tomb, and we share the story of Christ with all. We celebrate the mountaintops of our faith, but we live in the valleys. We live in the messiness of the everyday. When we provide shelter and food for our loved ones, when we attend school functions cheering for our teams, when we go to the restaurant, when we have a beer at the bar, when we come to this sanctuary to be refreshed and renewed, our whole lives are the lived vocation of sharing Christ's story with others. To deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow Jesus. He has given us strength for the journey. He has stooped down to us. He has reached out his hand towards ours. And he has declared that we are not to be afraid. For Christ leads us and supports us all the days of our lives. And when we are cowering in fear, or when we're upright in joy, take heart, dear ones, and do not be afraid.